Washington Street, appealing an administrative decision. Overnight camping at the racetrack is not a pre-existing condition for 282 Thrasher Road. Do I have an abutters roll call, Mike?
I'll rely on DeForest to do that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot you're here tonight. It's such a rare occasion that we get blessed with your presence. Ooh.
William and Joan Hanault, please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Charles Egbert. Here. Michael Kopp. John and Grace Horvath. Here. Jean Ransom. Scott and Deborah Dakota. Jeffrey Scott and Joy Pratt Morse. Albert and Doris Bergeron, Irrevocable Trust. Dennis and Heather McNamara. Charlene Desjardins. Kenneth Patton. Yeah. State of New Hampshire. SS Realty LLC. Todd Osgood Construction LLC. City of Claremont Conservation Commission, holders of the Stevensbrook Conservation Easement. Rose Maley.
I'm representing Rose. She couldn't make it tonight.
Dennis Fleury. William and Janet Sheehan. Joshua Dupuis Sr. and Reverdy and Rebecca Ford. Here.
Okay. Thank you.
Before we continue, I'm just going to make sure the public doesn't have a problem. We've discussed it with the board. Before this application got brought to the city, there's been a couple of other butters that had talked to me about the camping, asking what to do, and I advised them to do what we told you to do before. I just want to make sure that there's nobody from the Speedway or none of the abutters that have a problem with the fact that we discussed before this was brought to an agenda. Jim, Phil, you guys have a problem that, as a Speedway? No? Does any of the abutters have a problem that I spoke with one of your fellow abutters? Being none, Mike, would you please proceed?
Okay, thank you. So what we have tonight is sort of, second in 2 months, an appeal of an administrative decision. In this case, there was a request by the Speedway to have their race teams be able to stay the night after a race and leave the next morning. That is a email of request from their attorney, Tony DiPadova. That's in your packets. We discussed it a little bit. I considered it in light of the variance that was approved by this board for the seasonal campground. And in light of that variance, and also considering that, yes, there has been a history of camping in the parking area, there's really been no documentation of that camping. I had no way of really substantiating the claim that it was long-term. I think the more that we talk about it, the more I hear different revelry or memories of such a use long-term. Regardless what the determination was, that with that variance for the seasonal campground, that effectively eliminated any other camping activity on the property. So that's the core, the basis of the zoning determination. In response, the attorney appealed that decision, and that's why we're here tonight. So for the zoning board, the question is, did I properly interpret the zoning ordinance, the variance that was granted? And the actions, just like we've done before, it's strictly limited to, if you agree with the administrative decision, then the decision stands, and the overnight stays by the race teams would need to be sort of moved somewhere else, or they would file for a variance to allow it some way remedied other than through this appeal. If the zoning board determined that I was in error in making the administrative decision, then it would come back to me. I would discuss with the Speedway how to work on these overnight stays to be consistent with the historic use and how we work from there. But it is referred back to the zoning administrator, but the zoning determination is eliminated and we move on from there. So any questions about the process? I think having gone through it recently, maybe fresh in our minds. No. There are no, and just to be clear, this is just for or against the zoning determination. Anything, no conditions can be added, no stipulations can be added. It's an up-down vote. And just want to make sure you understand that.
So, I have a question, Mike. So, in the letter from Tony DiPadova, okay, and he mentions they stay overnight until approximately 10 a.m. the next morning. We can't change that to like 8 o'clock so that it's not like 10 o'clock is 10 or 11 is usually when you get out of a campground. So, I mean, if we changed it to 8 o'clock, we couldn't do that. We can't set.
I
Okay.
would advise against it.
If we reverse your decision, you go back to the Speedway, discuss that. That's where that comes into play, correct?
Right.
The terms of what would be considered acceptable.
Acceptable accessory use, essentially.
Okay, so there is a point where that could be.
Right. We can get into the realm of whether it's a nuisance or a safety hazard. But we would be talking in the context of what the operation is and the limits of the operation.
Do you want to read into the record Rick Bergeron's letter?
I would like to, if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay. So this is an email response. I'll read out my initial email to Rick, and then his response, and I'll just have a couple other comments as well. So this is from last Thursday, July 6th. Rick, as we discussed, the ZBA is hearing an appeal for the Speedway to maintain short-term camping for their race teams next Tuesday. You seem to have no real issues with the race teams staying overnight, Friday to Saturday a.m. If you wish to make that part of the record, please let me know, and I can share your opinion with the ZBA. Rick's response to me was, Mike, and this is the chief of the fire department, with regard to this issue, the fire department has experienced no past adverse history or concerns with this long-standing practice. A check of our response reports over the past 14 years shows that we have responded to the track only 6 times during the racing season. Of these 6 calls in the past 14 years, 3 were for medical aid, 1 was a storm-related power line down, and 2 were false reports. Therefore, I feel that our data confirms my initial statement that this facility generates no operationally based responses for the fire department. Those responses that we have experienced at the track are similar in nature to our responses to any other public facility in the community, but generally less numerous than other sites. Please let me know if you would like more information. This also reminds me of a conversation I did have with the police chief. He had indicated that he'd be interested in coming, but in his absence, he was okay with me sharing his opinion. But you can also see that the Speedway in their email states that they've spoken with the chief of police, Mark Chase, and he sees no problem with the practice. He reiterated that opinion to me on Thursday of last week. He also reminisced over having worked at the Speedway back in the mid-'80s and witnessing the practice at that time. So I just wanted to share that with you, and he did have no issue with the overnight camping or overnight stays, however you call it.
And am I in the right to say the letter stating that there is nothing mentioned in their operating permit? That is correct?
I did review the licensing board minutes for the last couple of years, and I didn't have the opportunity to follow up on this, but there had been over the last 3 years discussion of camping at the Speedway, and various times, the question was whether the licensing board had the authority to regulate camping or just look at sale of alcoholic beverages or events, you know, the operational aspects of the Speedway itself. But there was no, from these minutes, I did not see any indication of, at least for the last 3 years, any intent by the licensing board to regulate the overnight camping.
So Jane's letter is correct. It's not in,
That's right. The email correspondence I shared from Jane Taylor is consistent with what I found.
thank you. Do you have any other questions for Mike before we continue? Okay, thank you, Mike, at this point.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll have you back up there in a minute. Tony?
I'm Tony DiPadova. I represent Claremont Speedway. We have the Speedway owners here tonight, Jim Ambrose and Phil Hayes. And I have some people here tonight that are willing to speak to this historic practice of overnight camping, if you will, or overnight stays, overnight parking in the parking lot for basically for drivers, for race teams, and primarily for safety reasons. Many of these people travel a long distance. They have teams that come from Canada, from Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and the races end late at night, and it's a long drive home for them, and many of them arrive in campers, and it's been a long-standing practice. But what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background first, identify what I believe are the legal issues, and I believe it's a very narrow legal issue for you to decide here today, and then I would like to present some witnesses who can fill in the blanks. And Mr. McCrory said, your job is to decide whether or not he made an error. And he may not have had all the information if he hasn't talked to some of these people that I have spoken with in the last few weeks, who can provide you with a good historical background of this track. The Claremont Speedway has been operating in the same location since 1947. They are celebrating their 70th year this year. They've been in operation well before the zoning ordinance was in existence. And the city and Mr. McCrory recognized in his decision that the racetrack qualifies as a pre-existing non-conforming use, meaning that it was a pre-existing use before the zoning ordinance was put in place. So it can continue even though it may not be permitted under the current zoning ordinance for the zone in which it sits. We would submit and will provide evidence today that camping on site for race teams has never been prohibited by the city council or by the licensing board at any time until last year. The city has always had direct knowledge that this has been going on. As you heard Mr. McCrory talk about his conversation with Chief Chase, the police department's been there for years and years and years during these races, and has been able to see that this camping is going on. If certainly there was a problem or it was beyond their authority, it should have been brought to the attention of the racetrack prior to then, and it was not. The race operations have always included overnight parking for or camping for race teams, and I think in my initial letter I may have said that they stay the night, some of them the night after the race, some of them arrive the night before the race. But I think you'll see that the evidence will show that overnight parking and camping has always taken place for well over 40 years, well before the zoning ordinance was in effect. And I have here tonight, I'm going to ask in a few minutes Scott Hinckley to address that issue, and Ernie Boudreau. But as far as the legal issue goes that you have to decide here today, the pre-existing non-conforming uses are protected by New Hampshire RSA 674-19 and the New Hampshire Constitution. They're also protected by Section 22-113 of your zoning ordinance. A non-conforming use is a lawful use which existed prior to the adoption of the zoning ordinance prohibiting that use, and that does not currently conform to the requirements. So what we have here is a racetrack which has incidental to that racetrack and integral to the racetrack operations had provided for overnight camping for race teams. Both the state constitution and state statutes recognize that the established use of land in this way cannot subsequently be restricted. So let's look at how those standards apply to this case. The city, as I said, has already conceded the racetrack is a pre-existing non-conforming use, and therefore the racetrack as a speedway, as providing automobile racing, is allowed. Any operations incidental to that are also pre-existing, so long as it's not something new that they've started since the existence of the zoning ordinance. The evidence here will establish that overnight camping on the race weekends has existed as part of this use as long as the racetrack has been in existence, and that's been 70 years. Overnight camping, and it's really not camping, it's overnight parking. It's a place for drivers and their teams to stay. Some of them arrive, like the ones that are coming from Canada may arrive on Thursday afternoon for a Friday race. Some of them are staying the night after and leaving on Saturday morning after a Friday night race. And the city's always recognized this as a lawful and continuing non-conforming use until recently. And I think part of what happened is prior to the current owners, there was never a licensing requirement. That's a fairly new thing. And so we're required to come before the licensing board, which includes the chief of police and our city manager, to get a license, even though we're in non-conforming use. And they set certain parameters. They said, and the abutters are invited to those meetings as well, and they have input as to the time the gates open, the time the gates close, when the first practice runs can start on a Friday or a Saturday. And this issue of overnight camping came up, and I believe that the licensing board wasn't sure that was in their purview and sort of punted it to you. So said you have to deal with zoning for that. But should this be deemed, which what I believe it is, as a pre-existing non-conforming use, that would be one of the items that would be taken up at these licensure meetings. So that would address your concerns if they want to address what time they can come in and what time they have to leave on certain days. That would be something that would be in the purview of the licensing board. So the decision for you today is really relatively narrow. It is this a pre-existing non-conforming use? That is, did the use of overnight camping exist prior to the zoning ordinance going into effect? And my understanding is this zoning ordinance was the late 1970s, so prior to that would be the time period we're looking for, and I have people here tonight that can address that. The other thing I'd like to address is that Mike mentioned, well, he looked at this in light of the fact that you've approved a variance for a seasonal campground. That's on another section of the property. It's not in where the racetrack is, and that's really totally separate and distinct from this. The granting of that variance in no way takes away any rights that are grandfathered by a pre-existing non-conforming use. Those are my understanding, are seasonal sites. They're campsites and fit under the definition of campground in the zoning ordinance. In this case, this is not a campground. It's a parking lot. There's no water. There's no electricity. There's no open fires. These are just people that are spending the night in their self-contained units, so they don't have to make a long drive. So that's where we're at. But we believe that were this board to prohibit overnight camping, as it had continued for all these years, that would be a violation under state law and the state constitution. So at this point, I think what I'd like to do is ask first Scott Hinckley if you'd come up and address the board. Introduce yourself, provide a little background about your involvement with the racing and this racetrack in particular, and how long that you can testify it's been going on.
Scott, the only thing I'm going to ask of you, and it's going to be the same for everybody else, just keep it to possibly within a 5-minute window, if you could, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Scott Hinckley. I'm a local resident and business owner. I've been I've been associated with Claremont Speedway since I was grade school. After high school, I became active on a race team. I have been helping pits. I have driven. I have owned cars. I have officiated at the Speedway. So I've been affiliated with it for quite some time. My first recollection of people camping at the Speedway was really about early 70s when there was a touring series called it was either NASCAR North or Busch North. There was several transitions of race series that were run by Tom Curley. There was a lot of Canadian participation at that time in those series, and there has been up to this day. Now there are many other different classes of series that are traveling also. The modifieds, the late models, the pro stocks, mini stocks, all these different people. And they all have people that follow them, and many of them are traveling long distances to stay overnight. I have personally stayed from Florida to tracks in Canada. In the Northeast, the tracks that we've stayed at, we competed at. Makes for a long day after you race and then have to turn around and leave. That's why these people are looking just to stay overnight or stay the day before. The atmosphere is approximately exactly, not approximately, but exactly what was said by the fire chief and the police chief. I've never seen any problems at these tracks. It's mainly family oriented. Do you have any questions?
When you said, I wasn't following you completely. When you said the people from Canada, were they the people that were looking to stay overnight? Were the race car teams? They weren't fans.
There's fans, there's teams, there's all.
So the overnight camping, overnight staying, isn't just for the drivers who are tired, it's for the fans now too?
Many of the fans have traveled, and this is, yes. And it's the same people.
No. Race car
I have gone.
Teams or fans? A fan comes down to watch the race, isn't part of the team. I'm asking you.
Many of them are families of the teams.
But they're still fans. So what I'm saying are the overnight privileges that you're looking for aren't just for the race car teams, they're for the fans also?
It's all in how you want to describe it.
No, because my question, follow-up question to that would be...
Are you a member of this board or a citizen? That's the same thing.
No, it's not. I mean,
Well,
those people are citizens, but they're not members of this board. So my question, my follow-up question to you is, if it's the driving teams, and I can see they're being tired and having to have a place to stay, but I'm questioning why we should allow the fans to stay, because you've got campgrounds, transient campgrounds in Newport, in Ascutney, Walmart, I mean, places they could stay.
they're bringing revenue into your community.
Well, they would be bringing revenue into my community if they parked at
A hotel.
a hotel.
They wouldn't come, believe me.
Scott,
That's
just-
not a different situation.
Just because I don't remember volume, and I'm sure that there's a couple of butters that can vouch for this, but what 1970s, before my time of being there, I can remember the Act Tour. What would you say the biggest volume of overnight parking for the racetrack? Volume, what would you, in your memory? I don't
At Claremont
recall.
Speedway, the earliest I remember is the 70s. The latest were 5 years ago, maybe. I can't remember for sure how many years ago was the last act race here. I'm going to say 7, 8. That's my guesstimate. I mean, we're not talking about the thousands of campers that you're talking about.
And that was
No,
my,
so 7 or 8, and that includes
that
the
includes,
fans
yes.
and the families.
I don't know if
and
they're fans or competitors, but that's what I've seen at Claremont.
And that was my question to him, because when I was affiliated with Sonny Fleury, when Sonny owned the track and I worked there, and we had the tours come in, my memory could be wrong, but I wouldn't recollect that there was more than 5 campers, and they were in the back corner of the parking lot. But there again, some of the abutters can vouch for how many people actually used it as a overnight parking lot. And I would prefer the term, in this case, overnight parking lot, because this is not a campground. This is not this is no different than parking in Walmart. This is overnight parking that we're addressing. And the fact that, and I'm going to reiterate this and reiterate it and reiterate, we are here to discuss the fact, did the city, under the information they have, make a false judgment of this being a general practice?
Right.
Of something that goes back not 2 years, not 3 years. We're going back to when, before zoning, when nonconformity wasn't there. And this is a practice that we're looking for information for.
And it's not a weekly affair.
Is there any other questions for Mr. Hinckley, please?
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
If I may, just Scott, will you just address quickly what your experience has been with other tracks? How many other tracks have you been to that don't allow it?
I don't,
Yeah,
Tony,
that's not-
that's not, the decision tonight is whether it was there before or not. And I just don't want this to drag out to 11 o'clock
Sure.
tonight. I'd like to, we have other applicants,
Right,
and
have Ernie Boudreau.
And other cities have different regulations.
My name's Ernie Boudreau, lifelong resident of Claremont, and affiliated with Claremont Speedway for well over 50 years. As far back as I can remember, which is a long, long time, there's never, ever been a problem with anybody staying overnight at the Speedway, and it's always been allowed. I have no idea where the problem even lies, but there's never been a problem with the police department, fire department, or anyone. And I just am very disheartened to watch the way the Speedway gets treated in this town.
were you a
You
member?
guys, I understand what you guys are saying, but, you know, the Speedway is a great asset to this town. They bring in revenue. Stores do well by it, Jiffy Mart, Subway, gas stations, and they get treated like crap.
Ernie, you were a member of CODA, correct?
Correct.
And how long did CODA run the track? I just
4 years,
They were 4 years, and in that 4 years' time, they had the tours come to town, correct?
correct.
In your recollection of those 4 years as Claremont Owners Drivers Association, for the people who don't know, what would you say that the overnight parking during those 4 years, because you would have been involved as an owner, what would you say the overnight parking would have been? How many units? Average, give or take. We had the act race that came down, you had the modified tour come in, you had the supermods come in. On average, what would you say?
I've honestly never seen more than 10.
Okay.
It's always been very small, quiet group. They stay overnight, pack up in the morning, and leave.
Any other questions, Mr. Boudreau?
Well said.
Thank you,
Sure.
Ernie.
I'm in the
Oh,
middle of
she
asking
had
a
a
question.
question.
Well, put your hand up, quicker.
I'm right next to you.
Nothing?
So,
Nothing?
just wanted to clarify. So you did see this overnight parking happening prior to 1970?
Absolutely. Nothing else?
Thank you, Ernie.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I say something to him, just to clarify?
Ernie, hold on one sec.
Mr. Boudreau, I just want to clarify that. I don't think we're trying to give the racetrack a hard time. And I think that, personally, I think the reason this all came up was because of the application that came for the seasonal campground. And at that time, it was stated that there wouldn't be any overnight campers. So I think that's where this question came, whether it's always happened or not. And I think that's why this has come into question and why it's before us now to clarify.
But I always understood that was two separate issues.
It is two separate issues,
Then
but
how
at
did
the
they get-
time of that application, it was stated that there wouldn't be overnight people, how did you say it, overnight parking in the
There was gonna be no
racetrack
transient in the
There would be no
campground.
transient people in campers, overnight parking. That was stated during that whole application process. So I think that's why all the questions are being raised now, because you're saying, well, it was said that they weren't gonna do it and they can't do it. So now, now we're looking back at the history and we're trying to clarify this whole situation.
And just for clarity, Ernie, where she's going, what we as a board tonight have to look at,
Yeah.
was Mr. McCrory informed properly at the time of his decision when he made the decision? And this is why we're saying overnight parking, how long, how far back do you remember? And this is what we're asking you. And I'm sure some of the abutters that have lived up there forever and a day are gonna say the same thing. Relatively, they may have different numbers, they may have a different view, but this is what we're looking for. This is what our concern is. Was there overnight parking at the racetrack prior to zoning?
Okay?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just a minute.
The last witness I'd call would be Jim Ambrose, who is the track owner, but also has a longstanding experience with the Claremont Speedway before he owned it.
There again, Jim, just kind of keep it brief, please.
Brief.
Thank you.
Jim Ambrose. I live in Cornish. I'm one of the owners of Claremont Speedway. I've been around the Speedway since the days when the track was dirt, back in the 60s. They've always been able to stay in the parking lot after the races. Never have I seen any huge amount of campers there or people there, because they're not campers. They're sleeping there. They're overnight parking, as you say. And the, as far as the mix-up between the campground and the parking in the parking lot, there was no transients in the new potential campground. That's what we were talking about, Tracy.
No, but
No, we specified that there would be, that camping, any stay, like any overnight stays in camping would be separate from the racetrack. They would be separated, and that there wouldn't be any overnight transient camping, so.
specifically.
But in the campground.
Technically, yeah, this technically
In
is
the
different than
campground.
It was
that.
in the
In the
campground.
campground.
What I'm saying is, we said there would be no camping, because it was brought up by the abutters that this was a problem and a concern for them, and we said there would be no parking or camping on the racetrack. So this is now different than that, so that's why we're discussing it.
Continue, please.
This has been done for over 50 years, probably pushing 70. I've been around there, like I said, since the early 60s. It's always been done. It was done the first year that we owned the track. People stayed in the parking lot. The second year we owned the track, a couple people pulled in there to park, and all hell broke loose. The police were up there. Someone had called them and gotten hold of zoning, and they said you can't stay there. I believe the attorney made a decision, said you can't. So we didn't do it. It's becoming a problem to us. This past weekend, we had people coming from Canada. We had people coming from Connecticut. They work all day, drive up here 3 or 4 hours, race until 11:30 at night, then have to drive home. they'd like to get a night's sleep. That's what we're asking for. Something that's been done for 50 years. Not asking for anything new. Something that's been done here and every other track in New England.
But just to clarify, other cities, other towns have different rules. We're just talking about Claremont.
Okay.
So I have a
So
question.
it's been done here for 50 years. Go ahead.
Well, no, hasn't been here for 50 because we didn't have zoning back then, so.
No, the camping he's saying.
Camping, of
The-
course.
the
No, no.
overnight
Parking has
Okay,
been
all
done
right.
here since before zoning.
Okay, so I have a question for you. How long have you owned the racetrack?
Since December 10th, 2014.
14, so 3 years.
This is
And
the third year.
Yeah, okay, and, because when you were saying that the first year you had overnight parking and then it became problematic in year 2, and I was thinking back, that was about the time that we were going through the other application, just, I'm not gonna say what it was, just the other application, and I think that's where, when statements were made, I think that's why people started calling and stuff, so, I mean, that's why we're here to straighten it out tonight.
Is there any other questions for Mr. Ambrose?
I have one.
Oh,
Shoot.
What time is payout?
Pardon me?
What time do the drivers get paid out?
Well, it used to be they got paid out at the pit gate late at night, but now we're a little bit more advanced. We print the checks the next morning and they go in the mail.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry?
It used to be cash many, many years ago.
That's what they get
Okay,
for
I
winning.
figured that out,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Tony, do you have anybody else to speak in favor?
I have no one else, but I do have a couple of signed statements that I'd like to give to the board.
Unfortunately, Tony, we're not going to accept them. We made a practice now that anything to us needs to be presented to the board prior. That's in fairness to the abutters, anybody else that's involved, that they have the option, if there is anything, that they have to view it. If you'd like to submit it to Mike, and it can be submitted to us at a later date for our records, but as far as accepting it into the record, I'm sorry, we're not going to accept it.
Okay. Then again, I just reiterate that I think you have a very narrow legal issue to decide here tonight, and it's not about, what time camping may start or stop, or, whether it's appropriate or not, or whether it's done in Walmart parking lot or not. It's how long has this been going on? If it has been going on before the existence of the zoning ordinance.
It's been going on since zoning.
Right.
It's been going on after zoning, too.
Yes.
So it's
So
been
it's a-
something that's been historically, and I will vouch for that.
And then that's an easy decision. Then it's a pre-existing non-conforming use and it has to be allowed.
Thank you.
Can I ask Mike a question?
Sure.
Mike, question for you. So, just for my clarification, is there any legal issue with city documents when something is decided that is a grandfathered, non-conforming use? Does that need to be recorded anywhere for it to be legal?
I would say no. It's the question of presence of evidence. Any preponderance of evidence to one side or another. I don't know if this was probably before your time, but we had a case where there was an appeal where somebody claimed that there was a long-standing use, but there was no documentation, very little supporting evidence, and the board found against that
Okay.
claim. So, some of what we're hearing tonight is also an education to me. So, if you're asking whether the absence of documentation is reason enough for the decision, I leave that to you, whether what's being presented is enough proof.
Okay.
Because it is up to the applicant or the appellant in this case to prove their case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chuck? Go ahead, Becky. You're Before you start throwing stuff at me, we'll get you up here.
No, I'm in a good mood.
And I'm gonna ask you the same thing I've asked everybody else. Please be brief. Please remember what we're here. Was this something that happened?
Right. Rebecca Ford, a butter. My father raced when it was a dirt track, Howard Stevens, if anybody remembers. And I worked there, and I don't remember overnight camping, but I wasn't looking for it. I do remember they camped when Dennis had it, but I also know they called Dennis back because they did have a ring with fire in it, and that was the controversy. I have been calling since they have
No, I know
owned
what years
it
she's talking
about the campers there, because I was under the impression there was no camping. I, however, have not called at one time this year because frankly, I'm tired of it because no matter what happens, they seem to get whatever they want. I'm tired of we coming to meetings, they getting their license, there's restrictions, but they still break it. This year they opened the gates early one night. It's not a big deal, I realize that, but it's integrity. So my question tonight is yes, there has been camping, but I'm concerned if you allow it. Now, are we going to have the entrance fixed again? Because with
Point
the
of order.
campground,
Yes.
Can we stick to the topic,
Yeah,
please?
this is only overnight parking.
right,
fees,
but I'm saying if you allow it, now they come back and want to
if-
do transient campground. What if they have
that's
overnight
totally-
concerts?
That's totally something different.
And the lawyer brought up they'll come in Thursday. Now it's Thursday night, Friday night. Now it's a 2-night. So if it's an entertainment destination, we've got Friday races, Saturday's concert, Sunday go-karts. You see
Just-
what I'm saying?
Right, and what happens from here, Becky, if the board disagrees with Mike's decision, it goes back to Mike, the racetrack, and Mike, am I correct in saying they have the opportunity to be there also in trying to determine what guidelines for overnight parking? Is that how, I guess that would be the next question. The thing tonight is whether parking overnight has been historically there. What happens if, yes, it was, what you stated, yes, Dennis did, I'm sure Sherry did, I know for a fact Sonny did. So with the fact that we're establishing, yes, there was camping. Mike.
Overnight parking.
Overnight parking, excuse me.
Yeah, but we have to use camping because that's what they requested.
It's,
I think there's a difference.
camping to me would be you have some type of amenity. Whether you have a fire ring, you have water, you have a sewer hookup, you have electricity. You go to a state park, they have that stuff provided. They have water and a dump station, and most of them provided to you. This is not being provided there. And we're veering off course again. The question is, was there historically overnight parking at the Speedway? Whether it be Thursday night and Friday night, or it was Friday night when they ran Saturday night.
Okay, so then,
Historically, was there campers ever at the campground?
okay, so my question is, yes, I agree.
Speedway, sorry.
But what happens after? Do they can just camp anytime? That's what I'm,
I think
That's not for us,
I'd like to
yeah.
That's not for us, but let Mike.
Wait, I do have one, just,
Yeah, she's not leaving yet. I just want to do a quick clarification. Please don't go. When this whole process goes through, and, if the decision's upheld, then we follow that. If the decision is overturned by the zoning board, it does come back to my office, and we do look how that use fits into the current zoning ordinance. We look at the broader landscape of what other regulations apply to the site that would put it under certain controls and restrictions. We're talking sanitation, noise, fires, anything like that. That's off the top of my head what I would probably discuss. This is an administrative process. It's not a public hearing process when it gets referred back to me.
Okay.
That was my question, if it
Yep.
did.
So Mike, when it goes back to you, there's no public input. It's between you and the Speedway. And that's when you will set guidelines.
It's governed by the zoning
Yeah, it's
ordinance.
guidelines based off of the other.
So I think what would be fair is that what we do is take under consideration any testimony received tonight, balance that against what the zoning ordinance requires and what the, you know, what the overall, the overall established non-conforming use is.
Can at this point then, because the concerns that would affect aren't really what we're looking at tonight, can the abutters address a letter to you and say a certain period of time, their concerns?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that would handle, because the concerns of, and I'm gonna go probably way off in left field here, the driveway going in, will it handle a camper, or, you know, the campfire aspect, which I don't think,
250
but this is all stuff that I
It's
think
a
if you
parking
folks
lot,
have,
you have a fire.
you address the letter to Mike, you do it in a reasonable amount of time.
And who's going to patrol it at night to make sure there are no fires? You know, that they're
we're-
leaving appropriately.
The enforcement side of it, unfortunately, is a little soft right now. We'll use that term. The city is working on getting enforcement, getting the appropriate people, and a lot of it is hopefully the landowner, in this case, the Speedway.
So.
And and like I said, that's a concern that I'd like you to address in a letter
Yep.
to the city, to Mike.
Will
and-
do.
And proceed that way. That's not what we're here for tonight. We're
Very good.
here, we're campers allowed to stay on site.
If you have more to say, I think
And-
Abigail
No.
has a question for you, so.
Oh.
I just had one,
Just want to, one last thing. and
Sure.
The question of, and I've met with other abutters, and this has been a very common concern. We have heard it, so this is to the board and to the audience at the same time, that there is concern about creep of use, that things get sort of build on and that certain things expand was sort of incrementally, and I think that's part of your concern, and I've heard it from others as well.
And
We hear that.
And you can
I'd like
address
to
that,
focus.
though.
Yes, I'd like to focus on the appeal at this time, but, so just so the zoning board and the public know, we're aware of that concern. Let's focus on the appeal.
And just for a time factor for everybody, so we don't have any hard feelings, Mike, is a 2-week window of opportunity fair?
No window, no.
To
no
get you a
deadline.
letter for, you know,
No
within?
deadline. Anytime.
Okay.
It'll be.
So any time after, if it's 3 months from now and there's a problem, send him the letter.
I just wanted to clarify for the record, when you were talking about working there and not seeing camping that you were aware of, but you weren't looking for it, what years was that?
Let me
Careful,
see.
you're gonna give your age away.
Oh, I
You
just
said
turned
how
60.
old you were when you were doing it, so.
63, 4th of July, so my son was born in 1978, so I worked 70s, and he was born August, so I finished out that year, and then I was done. But, like I said, I did my job, and that was using the old entrance, so I just walked the money over to where I think it's where they go in the gates now,
Okay.
and so I never paid attention because I was,
You're saying you're at the old pit gate? Is that what-
yes, back.
Do you know what she's talking about? How
do.
it's, okay.
We've been there.
Just wanted to make sure you
Multiple
understood
times. Do you
where the
remember?
old pit gate was.
I'm too young.
Well,
to
Right.
explain it to me.
The new pit gate, the new pit gate's on the right, old pit gate's on the left.
Yep.
So it was
Parking's on the right.
early,
I remember.
early 70s, and I graduated high school in 72.
Okay.
So it was probably, 71 up through 78.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Chuck, you wanna?
Sure.
I'm just gonna pick off on this side of the room as we go.
Mike, we stick to 5 minutes.
And, sorry, I kind of overstood my 5-minute rule there, so.
Chuck Egbert, but a lot of the concerns that Becky raised are the same as mine, that this is just going to be a stepping stone to turn this into a full-blown transient camping for the entertainment destination. They're already talking about showing up Thursday night before the Friday night race and staying after. And I, for one, have walked the racetrack after there has been illegal camping on the facility, found many fire rings with burnout tires in them.
I'm going to ask you the same question. You've lived there for as long as I can remember.
Yep,
Do you ever recall campers staying in the parking lot?
I can. And what it is a continuation of another thing that the city has been discussing about a lot lately, is lack of code enforcement is the only reason why it persisted.
This is going to be something that's happened prior, and I cannot stress enough, what we're talking about tonight was the use of campers staying overnight or overnight parking used. Mr. McCrory is not a resident from Claremont. Mr. McCrory is not a native from the area. He can only go by what's presented to him at that point in time. So tonight, his decision was based upon what was presented to him. What the appeal is, they have done this, it's been done, it's been a continued use over. What we are concerned with for us, and unfortunately, I understand what you're saying, I understand what Becky is saying. That's not what we're here looking at tonight. What we're here looking at tonight, has the racetrack historically had overnight parking?
And can
Like
you-
I say, if
And
they
you-
have, it's been against code.
Unfortunately, it goes before code. It goes before
no,
zoning,
no.
but that's what we're here for, is the fact, yes, there was. That was the question.
So,
The only
so wait,
Well,
wait.
it's just like in
Bonnie,
Michael
you get
McCrory's,
you get your turn. Please be quiet.
it's like Mr. McCrory's memo from the planning department. It clearly states that there has been decades of unauthorized improvements and use at that facility without permit or license. So here we are talking about things that were done without permit and out license. So what is this? If you do it long enough, break the law or code,
That's not
that
what
it
we're here,
becomes
though,
right?
Chuck. That's not what we're here for. We're here, was there a history? And I cannot,
Is it a legal history?
doesn't matter, is the history there? That's the
history.
question.
So if you break the
Is
law
the
long
history
enough,
there?
then it becomes all right.
That's not our determination. Our
Michael.
determination is, was there overnight parking at the Speedway facility?
Without permit? Yes.
Thank you.
Wait.
That's all. Wait a
Wait,
minute,
no, no,
Chuck,
no,
hold
no.
on. We got
Go ahead.
questions for you.
I can't express how important it is to get time frames from you guys, because what we have to determine is this prior to the ordinance? Yes, but there are years attached to that. So can you recall the earliest you remember camping that you,
Really, to my knowledge,
Overnight parking.
Yeah.
to my knowledge, the only person who really did it was Dennis. The last owner before these was the only one that I really saw people parking in the parking lot. If there was some sporadic parking before,
And
it was sporadic.
can you tell us what year that was?
5 years ago was the year that I walked through the parking lot after they had an extended weekend of go-karts, when I counted all the burnt tires and the
Okay.
fire rings in the parking
5
lot.
years.
5 years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
And the fire department did show up that night.
Sorry, I forgot your name, sir. I'm sorry?
Stop horse.
Scott Morse. Oh,
Does it say the fire department?
hair's changed color.
Different too, so. You're getting as old as I am.
Good evening, Scott Morse, a butter. And the direct answer to your question, I've been lifelong resident of Claremont, have went to the racing since I was 11 years old, so I can remember the money teams coming in for the Molson tour and all those other tours that they had back in as early as 72, 73. If that's what we're here to resolve, then yes.
That's the question at hand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Morse?
Okay.
thank you.
And I wish the Speedway all the luck in the world. us as taxpayers need the extra revenue into the area.
Gentleman sitting next to Chuck, would you like to speak, sir? Gentleman on the end? We'll go to the... We're gonna work our way around the room.
Hello, Grace Horvath. I have a question for you guys. When was the zoning board started?
When did zoning start?
We moved here,
enacted 76.
okay, about,
I'll check.
okay. We moved here in '85, and Sonny Fleury owned it. I think other people ran it.
Sonny, I believe Sonny owned it. Sonny's daughter took it over.
That was later on.
Later on, Sonny, when I think when you're talking might have been the Coda days. Claremont owners
I had a
started.
question because someone said Coda 4 years, and I was curious of when that was.
I was a kid, so it's got to be 70s
Okay.
into the early 80s.
All right, before before my time.
I remembered as a kid going up there that it was Coda. But we're gonna. But it was still Coda.
Yeah.
But anyway, question being, you don't know, in your time since
We moved here in
Before.
'85,
85,
and unfortunately, Sonny Fleury is not here. He passed away. He asked his daughter, who lived down in Florida, to come up.
do you recall there being campers
Not
overnight?
Not why Sonny and Sherry ran
Since
it.
85.
Correct. I do, unfortunately, the previous owner, before the new owners, there has been overnight camping and campfires and noise and stuff with the last owner. I do know, I did mention to Mike that I do.
There again, try to.
Okay. Well, I mentioned to Mike that the antique racers would come up, and Sonny would let them come a little bit early and maybe do a picnic or a barbecue. And they didn't race at the end. They raced, not at the beginning, but they did their thing. And the pit entrance was over, if you're looking at the track.
Old entrance.
The old entrance, when it was safe, they would all go out and leave, so they weren't the last team to race. I do remember Sherry making a lot of comments of, boy, when we have race teams, tours come in, the hotels are packed, the campgrounds are packed, half hour to an hour away. Like I said, I just remember when we were here, there's been testimony in the 70s. That was before my time. I moved here in '85. So since '85 on, I haven't seen overnight camping.
Nope, that's good.
The very first meeting for zoning with the new owners in the winter of 2015 was over in the manager's office. All 4 owners were there, 5 abutters, the fire chief, chief of police, and Mr. Sandagate were there, and the secretary. And there was different discussion and stuff, and camping did get overnight parking, people spending the night, did get brought up, and Frank Sargent said, no overnight camping, they can go to Walmart. But he's no longer, but that was, and in the minutes, it's not there because I did have a copy, but I do remember that. So I got Frank, I was curious about when the zoning was. It has been brought up of 2 nights. I don't recall that. Thank you very much for your time, you guys. Sorry that we're here.
Thank you.
Gentleman in the back, are you? No? Anybody else in the back on this? Where do we want to start? Donnie. And there again, Donnie, I'm going to ask you, keep it brief. We're here as far as overnight parking?
Well, that's part of the
Historical.
situation is
introduce
I
yourself.
think we're getting tunnel vision.
Reintroduce yourself, please, for the
Don
record.
Thompson representing Rose Maley. I think we've been going tunnel vision here. I believe what the real legal situation here is, does it meet the criteria established? And are we going to follow the integrity to keep what was established?
Before you go, Donnie, the question is, was
That's not the only
overnight
question.
parking for what we're doing tonight,
Okay.
was overnight parking a practice prior to and going back to 1947?
I have a question.
Yes or no?
The question,
Go
do
ahead,
you
Fred.
know, as you
I
aren't
do
living
not
here,
know.
and as
I do
a
not know.
child that grew up here,
I do not know.
you don't know. So that's what we are here for tonight.
And now I have a question. I remember with this whole process, we discussed in depth the number of nights they could race, the times the gates would be open, the times they would practice, the times the gates would close, and when the parking lot would be empty. And when that was established, that criteria for this season was established, there was going to be the parking lot cleared. So this tunnel vision of was it historically done versus what was established for this season is gotten off track.
But you're getting
legal-
off track
the
because
legal
it's
interpretation-
non-conforming before.
The legal interpretation by the city attorney, my understanding is that what was established in the criteria for this season overrides and supersedes anything in the past.
So, Mike, wait, question, Mike. Those things are set by, which board? Licensing?
But, yeah, so I understand John's talking about the licensing board.
Okay, so that's not us. Does that supersede this legal question here?
Based on what I'm seeing from the minutes of those licensing board hearings for the last 3 years, there was some differentiation between the zoning and the licensing for the activities. I see them as co-occurrent, but not inclusive. So they both regulate the speedway, but they don't overlap, in my
Okay.
opinion.
So for example, if he's talking about them setting a standard that the parking lot has to be empty at a certain time, does that supersede what we are talking about? That is, I think, what his question is.
Yeah.
It's criteria.
I don't have an answer for you on that one.
I thought they turned the overnight parking over to the zoning board.
No.
But that was
No, legally can't be done.
the question, and this is information that I've just received late last week, were the minutes from the licensing board hearings. It's not something I was involved in. But in those discussions of timing, the minutes I have, I don't think include all the information that was discussed, nor does it have a copy of the application or the criteria. I'm looking at him.
Okay. Can I I think the answer to that question was something that the Attorney DiPadova said, that you said that the racetrack goes to a licensing board every year, and the licensing board determines when the gates will be open, when the gates will shut, and all of that. Is that correct? You said that?
Yeah, that's correct. And the licensing, it doesn't show up in the minutes, but the licensing, and the reason it doesn't is because they basically punted the issue of overnight parking to you. And if it's determined that it's a pre-existing non-conforming use that is permitted under the Constitution and under state law, then next year when we go back to the licensing board, that issue of camping and hours will be addressed along with everything else.
Not camping, overnight parking.
Overnight. And I would say it's been called camping, but in my letter to Mr. McCrory, I did call it overnight parking, so it is overnight parking.
So-
And just to address Don's comment about that overriding it,
I don't believe he's allowed to do that, is he?
So,
He had his time.
Mike,
I
just
asked him
to
a question.
clarify,
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
there is no specific notes in their minutes about the parking lot or parking.
For February 3rd, 2017.
Is that when they last met?
That was the last licensing board meeting.
They meet for different reasons.
So when they get a license, they must get some sort of a paper trail. There must be some sort of form, and if it is, wouldn't that all be spelt out in that?
Mike, our new city manager has something he'd like to.
I want to answer my question first.
Oh, he was reading, so I figured while he was reading, he might have a thing on the licensing part for us.
I don't think she's going to let me do
No,
anything
she's not gonna.
So what I'm seeing here in minutes, Chief Scott said for the beer garden, the proposal is to service start at 6 p.m. Last call will be 11 p.m. Beer garden will close at 11:30. This paragraph here is a little confusing, but these are from the same minutes. The proposal includes campers to be permitted to stay overnight Fridays in the parking lot with no facilities or fires. Campers will leave by 10 a.m. the day after the race. Chief Scott said their attorney asked what gives the licensing board the authority to say drivers can't camp on the property. That last sentence is not clear to me.
It's ambiguous to what the first statement is.
But it says
Right.
just Friday nights too.
That's what was stated, but the city manager may have some clarification on this. But this, coupled with other, the prior two meetings, the minutes that I do have where this was discussed, because I asked the city manager's office for minutes where this was mentioned at all, and they searched through and they found the last 3 years where it was mentioned.
They gotta have minutes.
The question of overnight stays, let's see. It was deferred to the planning and zoning. So when we talk about, again, preponderance, there's more indication that they were kicking it to planning and zoning
I just want to make sure we had that
rather
clarified.
than establishing
Yeah.
certain criteria for the overnight stays.
Right, so now we're back to tonight being just about if.
I only have one other thing. If you go ahead.
Well, we're gonna let you do it, and then the city manager has a comment, I think, regarding the licensing part.
Okay. And with the licensing, maybe it was possibly an oversight of what they were looking to have with this overnight parking situation. But tonight now is not the time to reinvent the wheel. And that's not where we need to go with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The licensing board on February 3rd didn't take up the question of overnight parking. It wasn't within our purview. The licensing board is an activity permitting board. It's not a use determining board. And the licensing board can be ill-informed and make an ill-informed decision due to inaccurate information. So the underlying zoning question would actually inform and overrule the licensing board.
Thank you.
I have a question. So the licensing board, do they make determinations like the gates will open at this time and close at this time, or they don't make any specific?
We could make opening and closing times, but if there is an underlying permitted use that has been non-conforming and pre-existing, then the licensing board would not necessarily be able to prevent the activity of
Right.
overnight parking without a legal challenge from the applicant.
Right, okay.
Mike,
Yes.
can we take a restroom break for a few
We have
minutes?
a motion for a 5-minute
Like to
recess.
make a
Do I have
motion?
second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. I think, did we miss anybody?
All you do is say, is anyone else?
Is there anybody else that would like to Bucky, you've been,
I think everything's been said. The only thing I'd like to say is
come up to the podium, you've been around long enough.
Introduce yourself.
So my name is Bucky Demers. I've been racing at Claremont Speedway for 30 years now. I got here in '85, graduated Stevens, went right into racing, and for all the years I can remember, anytime there's been a touring division series, there's been miscellaneous campers through the pits. Through the parking area. And I call them campers because of the big white things. I don't refer to the campers as a person. It's the unit camper. That's what I call it anyway. And so it's definitely been a camper for a long time. And as far as parking overnight, it's just a convenience and a courtesy for the racers. For the distance they put in and the time they put in, it's just makes it a little easier for them to be able to go home the next morning rested and safe.
How many campers?
That's about it.
How many campers do you think there are a night?
I mean, I can't say I've seen more than 15 or so. I mean, there's a back line there, and 10 to 15 at the most I think I've ever seen. Pretty small numbers as they go. Nothing like Loudon. There's 10,000 of them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Individuals or units?
Units.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Bucky. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak in favor? Against? Rev, come on up. And you weren't here for my earlier.
No, I wasn't. So that's good.
God, I wish you were here on time. Maybe sick of repeating this.
I was dealing with my job.
God bless you. What we're here tonight is we have a non-conforming use, and in the non-conforming use, was there overnight parking permitted in the past? That's the question.
Okay.
So the question, in well-rounded response from pretty much everybody, was yes, there was overnight parking at the facility. That's what we're concerned with. In your history, your memory banks, do you remember there being overnight?
Over all the years, I've lived there going on 38 years. Okay, up that street.
That puts us back, what, 85?
79.
Okay.
Okay.
You can tell I went to Stevens, right?
Yeah, I did too.
I take exception.
I just know when I moved in there the last day of August in 79. Over all those years, I never ever remember 15 campers.
Do you remember any?
I remember with the go-karts, I remember one camper being set up there for the person that ran it. So
prior to go-kart, we want to go back in time.
Prior to that, I don't remember more than maybe one or two ever staying there. Okay, and it was not a common occurrence. It was far and few between. But
you do remember?
I remember them being there.
Okay, that's the question at hand.
Okay, yeah, but my question is, if you break the rules, you break the law, or you break the guidelines that the city set forth, does that make them legal afterwards? Okay, after a duration of time? Because I can give you some examples that can go on for a long time. So my question is, if it's a non-conforming use and it was not legal over all these years, why would it become legal, or why would it become accepted just for the sake of saying, well, it's grandfathered because we did it? You know, I speed and don't get caught. I did it, but it doesn't make it legal. Doesn't make it right.
The difference is, we're talking about whether this was occurring before there was a zoning ordinance. If it was, the zoning ordinance does not supersede it.
Yeah, see, I don't remember campers being there much before Dennis Fleury owned it. I don't remember any actually before Dennis Fleury owned it.
See, I have to disagree with you, because when I worked for Sonny,
Yeah.
we had somebody, I think Scott was the one that, the Molson tour, which we were trying to figure the names of the tours back in the day.
Yeah.
And when Curly started bringing them down from Canada,
I don't remember them.
Working for Sunny, we had to put the campers, which is now the pit entrance, that end of the parking lot.
Yeah, I don't
He
remember 'em down
specified
there.
that.
I don't remember them down there. But again, ordinances came into use, campers weren't there for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Many, many years. So if you don't use something over a period of, my question would be, if you have a law that says
When does your
it's a
statute run out?
non-permitted use,
That was a good question.
and that law went into effect saying non-permitted, and then, because you're going grandfathered here, so if it was non-permitted, then all of a sudden, there's no campers here for 5 years. When does the grandfather kick in saying, well, it's a non-permitted use, the campers haven't been there for 5 years or 10 years, then all of a sudden they started parking again, so when is the lapse come into play the other direction, saying because they haven't done it in 5 years, it's no longer a permitted use?
Mike,
Would that be a question?
there is a statute of limitations kind of thing with the grandfathered use of the racetrack, correct? So if they don't use it as a racetrack
Overall,
for a
you-
certain amount of time,
That's right.
the use
So-
is no longer valid.
Right.
Would
Right.
that pertain to this if this was considered a grandfathered use?
This is being presented as accessory to the racetrack use.
So it would have to be, the
so
racetrack
parsing-
would not have to be in existence for 5 years.
So, no, it's
Whatever
actually
years.
12 consecutive
12,
months.
okay, whatever the span is, okay.
So we would,
So it's
we would
attached
really,
to,
we would look at the parent use.
Okay.
Before anything else.
thank you, that's my
That's
question.
typically how we do it, yeah.
Yeah, because the way I understood was the racetrack had to run races at least once or twice a year while it was up for sale. 1 year? Once? Okay, it had to race once to be a permitted use. I mean, to keep its
Keep
licensing
grandfathered,
ability.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was grandfathered.
So the parenting, what Mike just said, the parenting thing was the racing. So as long as they raced, the grandfathering of all this went along with it. So if they went a year without racing, then you have a valid point.
Okay? But
Because
the
it
same
wouldn't even be a
token,
racetrack.
if the law went into effect and they didn't use it for many years, I know we're talking grandfathered because of the
Gotta be the
thing.
racetrack though.
But,
Yeah.
Because
but,
it's part
okay,
of.
so let's go one step further.
You got 2 minutes, Rev.
Good, let's
Sorry,
go
I'm
one
just-
step further, let's go one
Let
step
you know.
further. Okay, and I know we can't talk about the campground per se, but when the campground was introduced, there was a study done on traffic, usage, and everything else. Okay, now, let's get away from that. Now, let's get away from that and say, if this is gonna happen, number one, I raise a question about, is there a law pertaining to the state of New Hampshire with carrying black water off the property?
Don't know, and I don't know if
Okay,
that regards.
in other words, is that illegal valid? Is that one question, carrying it off the property in a camper?
Add that in your letter with your
Okay.
wife to that, please, and I can't, like I said, I can't reiterate. The question is, was overnight, whether it be a pickup, whether it be a camper, was overnight parking historically used at any point from 1947 to 2017?
But
That's the
again,
question.
I'll say one more thing, and then I'll sit down. And I know you're saying I can't talk about campground, can't do this, can't do that. But one of the things is, when I stood up here a year ago, I had concerns about things getting expanded. And when the permit process went through, and we go back through the videos, was when the permit process came into play,
And
the parking lot was talked about, no campers. The
That's-
parking lot was talked about, no
That's-
campers.
But that's not, you missed that whole
missed the
part
whole
earlier.
beginning.
This has been bounced to us from that because they don't know.
Okay.
That's why it's here.
But we'll play the video and we'll get, because I got it on my computer,
Good.
and we'll bring it up.
Cut a copy of it, send it with your letter, please.
Okay, thank you.
That's important. Make a copy, send it in.
Yep.
Thank you, Rev. Anybody else want to speak? Good, and call public hearing closed. Mike, do you have anything else to add? I see you looking over there, scratching your chin on a piece of paper, so.
Try to get the jugular, sorry.
Oh,
I think everything that's in my staff memo stands. Just looking through, it was in the last few years that there were complaints and concerns about the overnight stays. But unfortunately, we don't have the data from the police department. I had requested whatever complaints or calls had been recorded over the last couple decades. But I think we are seeing something that is in people's minds because it has been such a focused subject of discussion over the last year, at least 2 years, to say the least. When you're considering this, I do ask that you focus on the request by Mr. DiPadova and then the zoning determination based on that request.
Thank you.
I have a concern with the letter from the fire chief when he talked about his 6 calls in the last 14 years that they responded to up there, and 3 of them were medical and 2 of them were false, and what the other one was. In no place in his email does he mention 5 years ago when they said, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Mr. Egbert said they were having the kart races, or go-kart races, and he walked the parking lot and found all the tire rings, fire rings.
They weren't called.
Pardon me?
They weren't called.
Yes, they were.
He said.
he stated
I
they
had a
were.
personal
Chuck,
conversation with
Chuck,
Dennis
please.
Furry about that situation.
No, I'm just saying that.
Just the public, thank you, Chuck, but
Yep.
the public part's closed.
Yes.
What Chuck stated was that he did a walk, there was there, the fire
And the
department
fire
went.
did, yes.
And what Tracy's trying to address to you is the letter from Rick doesn't address that. So,
Which I think is important.
I see.
so I guess the
That's all I
question
was trying to
that she's
say.
asking if they went there,
It doesn't matter.
it's not on the record that they went there.
No, understood. And it may be just the way that he characterized it. He checked their response reports.
Oh.
So that may have been different from a site visit the morning after, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So it may be that he missed that point. He missed that event.
Because it wasn't a call out.
It wasn't a call with sirens blaring coming up to the property.
If you've ever seen the response list, you really have to look at each and every line very, very clearly, because we get those reports in the council packet, so.
I
they're
just think
integral.
that was important to note.
That's
And it
fair.
was, I agree that it was missed.
So,
Okay, do we have any other questions for Mike? If not, do we have a motion to
Uphold or not.
uphold or turn over the administrative decision?
I'll make a motion, we overturn the administrative decision.
We have a motion, we have a second, and
do we have a second?
Richard did.
Richard?
As far as what we're to look at tonight, both sides of the coin have stated, at some point in time, there was overnight parking at the facility. We have a motion, a second. Is there any other discussion?
No.
Yes. I just want to make clarification that if this motion passes and they overturned your decision, that doesn't automatically mean that the Speedway has the right to have, they have to meet back with Mike and iron out what, it goes back to Mike, it doesn't.
We're not creating a transient campground.
Yeah, what it means is that if this vote passes, it goes back to Mike, and then Mike will meet with the Speedway, and you guys will iron out, and that's why it's important for the abutters that have concerns to get their letters to Mike.
We have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item on our agenda.
Was that unanimous?
Everybody wrong.
Yes.
I think you,
Did you,
DeForest didn't
I
get it.
believe everybody did aye.
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 Not me, I was.
Tracy's not eligible to vote.
Okay, so it's unanimous?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Jumped the gun on you. Next.